Lieutenant Commander Kim Dae-ho felt his boots crunch against the strange crystal ground of Viridian Prime. The sound was like walking on broken glass, but somehow musical. He had dreamed of this moment for years, ever since Earth made first contact with the Viridians 6 months ago. Now he was actually here on an alien world, breathing alien air through his helmet's filters. "Stay close, everyone," Dae-ho whispered into his comm. Behind him, Park Bo-ram adjusted her translation device one more time. She had spent countless nights learning the basics of Viridian language, practicing the strange clicking sounds until her tongue was sore. Lee Tae-min carried his cultural analysis tablet, filled with months of research about Viridian customs and behaviors. The alien city stretched before them like something from a fairy tale. Towers of pure crystal rose into the purple sky, each one perfectly shaped and gleaming in the light of 2 suns. The air shimmered with heat, and strange bird-like creatures with 4 wings flew between the buildings. "Remember," Dae-ho said, to his team, "we represent all of humanity today. No sudden movements, no loud noises, and definitely no touching unless they offer first." The Viridians were waiting for them in what looked like a ceremonial formation. There were 12 of them, arranged in 2 perfect lines. Each one stood exactly the same distance apart, their hands clasped behind their backs. They were tall, much taller than humans, with skin that looked like blue glass. You could almost see through it, and strange patterns of light moved underneath like slow lightning. Their faces were elegant and sharp, with large golden eyes that seemed to see everything. Each Viridian had 6 fingers on each hand, long and graceful. They wore robes that seemed to be made of the same crystal material as their buildings, and they didn't move at all. Not even to breathe, which made Dae-ho wonder if they breathed the same way humans did. "Greetings, beings of Earth," spoke the Viridian in the center. Her voice was like music, with strange harmonics that made the translator work hard to keep up. "I am Council Speaker Zethmira. We welcome you to our world with proper ceremony." Dae-ho stepped forward and bowed slightly, just as he had practiced. "Thank you, Council Speaker. I am Lieutenant Commander Kim Dae-ho, representing the United Earth Diplomatic Corps. We are honored by your invitation." Everything was going perfectly. The formal words were exchanged, the proper respectful distance was maintained, and both species seemed pleased with the careful protocol they had established through months of long-distance communication. Then, everything went wrong. One Viridian broke from the formation. She was younger than the others, or at least she seemed younger. Her movements were quick and excited, completely different from the controlled grace of her companions. She rushed toward the human delegation, her golden eyes wide with what could only be described as pure fascination. "Incredible!" she shouted, completely forgetting to use the formal speaking patterns. "Actual bipedal mammals! The legends were true." She circled around the humans like an excited child seeing their first zoo animals. The other Viridians froze in what was clearly horror. Council Speaker Zethmira's face turned a darker shade of blue, which probably meant she was either angry or embarrassed. Maybe both. "Velandra," Zethmira hissed, "return to formation immediately." But Velandra ignored her completely. She was now crouched down, trying to get a better look at the human's legs. "Fascinating locomotion system. And those little appendages at the end of your limbs, are those for grasping, for sensing, for mating displays?" Bo-ram nearly choked on her own spit at that last question. Taemin's face turned red, and he suddenly found the crystal ground very interesting to look at. Dae-ho realized that their carefully planned first contact was turning into something much more complicated than anyone had expected. Choi Yu-jin had thought being a xenobiologist would be exciting. She had imagined studying alien plant life, maybe discovering new medicines or finding creatures that could teach humans about evolution. She had never imagined being stalked by an overly enthusiastic alien who treated her like a fascinating lab specimen. Velandra had decided that Yu-jin was the most interesting human in the group, and she made no effort to hide her obsession. Every morning when Yu-jin left her quarters in the human diplomatic compound, Velandra was waiting outside with her strange crystalline notebook and what looked like a recording device. "Good morning, human Yu-jin," Velandra would chirp in her musical voice. "Today I will observe your morning sustenance consumption ritual. Yujin learned quickly that trying to eat breakfast while being watched by 6 golden eyes was nearly impossible. Velandra took notes on everything: how Yujin held her spoon, how many times she chewed, whether she made sounds while eating. The alien even tried to measure the temperature of Yujin's coffee with some kind of scanning device. "Your species consumes heated liquid stimulants first thing upon awakening," Velandra muttered while scribbling notes. "Fascinating behavioral pattern. Is this for nutritional purposes or psychological comfort?" "It's just coffee," Yujin said weakly. But Velandra was already moving on to analyzing how humans buttered their toast. The stalking got worse throughout the day. When Yujin went to examine some local plant samples, Velandra crouched behind a crystal pillar, watching how humans used scientific instruments. When Yujin laughed at something Li Taimin said, Velandra immediately pulled out her recorder. "The facial muscle contractions indicate pleasure response," she announced loudly. "The sound production suggests pack bonding behavior. Must document vocal frequency." Poor Taimin nearly jumped out of his skin when Velandra suddenly appeared next to him with her scanning device, trying to measure his bonding radiation levels. But the real problem started when Velandra decided she needed to understand human physical contact rituals. She had been watching the humans shake hands, pat each other on the back, and occasionally hug. To her alien mind, these were clearly complex social ceremonies that required careful study and replication. "Your bonding rituals, I must understand," she declared one afternoon, approaching Yujin with determination in her golden eyes. Before Yujin could react, Velandra grabbed her arm with both of her 6-fingered hands. The alien's skin felt cool and smooth, like touching polished stone. But instead of the quick handshake that humans normally did, Velandra held on and stared directly into Yujin's eyes without blinking. And she kept staring and holding. Yujin counted the seconds in her head. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Velandra's grip was firm but not painful, and her unblinking stare was starting to make Yujin feel very uncomfortable. You can let go now," Yujin said nervously. "Negative." Velandra replied seriously. "My calculations indicate optimal human bonding requires 37 seconds of direct eye contact during physical connection ritual." 37 seconds felt like 37 minutes. Yujin could feel her face getting red, and she could hear other members of both delegations stopping their conversations to stare at the weird scene. When Velandra finally released her arm, Yujin stumbled backward, feeling like she had just survived some kind of alien interrogation. "Excellent data collection," Velandra announced, making more notes. "Tomorrow we will test the chest impact bonding ritual I observed between human Daeho and human Taimin." "You mean hugging?" Yujin asked weakly. "If that is your term for full body contact bonding, then yes. I have prepared detailed measurements for optimal pressure and duration." Meanwhile, the other Viridians were not happy about any of this. Yujin could see them gathering in small groups, their blue skin flickering with darker patterns that probably meant they were upset. They spoke in rapid, musical tones that the translators couldn't keep up with, but their body language was clear. "Enough?" Council Speaker Zethmira approached Commander Daeho with barely controlled anger, radiating from her tall frame. "Your species is contaminating one of our youth," she said coldly. "Velandra has abandoned proper Viridian behavior patterns in favor of your chaotic mammalian customs. This is unacceptable." Daeho tried to explain that humans hadn't asked Velandra to study them, but Zethmira wasn't interested in explanations. In her mind, human influence was turning a perfectly logical young Viridian into something unpredictable and emotional. The diplomatic mission was starting to look like a disaster, and it was all because one curious alien had become obsessed with figuring out how humans worked. Velandra had completely lost her mind, and everyone could see it. What started as curious observation had turned into full-scale human impersonation that was both hilarious and terrifying to watch. Her quarters, which had once been a pristine example of Viridian minimalism, now looked like a crazy person's attempt to recreate a human living room. She had somehow acquired chunks of different materials and arranged them into shapes that vaguely resembled human furniture. There was a lumpy brown thing that might have been her version of a couch, made from what looked like crystallized mud. Next to it sat a flat surface balanced on 4 uneven legs that she probably thought was a table. "Please, sit on my comfort platform," she had said to Yu Jin during one particularly awkward visit, gesturing proudly at her homemade couch. When Yu Jin sat down, the thing immediately sagged in the middle and made a sound like breaking glass. But the furniture disasters were nothing compared to Velandra's attempts to master human emotional expressions. She had apparently been practicing in her mirror for hours each day, trying to recreate the facial movements she observed in humans. The problem was that Viridian faces weren't built the same way as human faces. When Velandra tried to smile, it looked like she was in severe pain. Her attempt at a concerned expression looked more like she was about to attack someone, and when she tried to wink, both of her eyes closed at different times, creating a disturbing, blinking pattern that made everyone uncomfortable. "Am I producing correct happiness indicators?" she would ask after performing her terrifying smile, completely unaware that several humans had actually stepped backward in fear. Oh, Minho, the team's psychologist, tried to be patient with her. He understood that she was trying to connect, but her methods were becoming increasingly disturbing. The breaking point came when Velandra decided she needed to master the human ritual of sharing food. She had spent days in her quarters, working with what appeared to be some kind of alien chemistry set, trying to create what she called optimal human sustenance. The result was a purple jelly-like substance that moved slightly when you looked at it and smelled like a combination of rotting fruit and industrial cleaner. "I have created nutritionally perfect human food," she announced proudly, carrying a large bowl of the purple goo into the human dining area. "It contains all the chemical compounds I observed in your meals, optimized for maximum bonding potential." Before anyone could stop her, she began spooning the stuff onto plates and handing them out to the humans. Most of them were too polite to refuse immediately. But Han So-young, the medical officer, took one look at the substance and knew this was going to end badly. "Maybe we should test this first," So-young suggested diplomatically. But Velandra was already eating her own portion, with enthusiasm. "See, perfectly safe. Now we can share sustenance like proper bonding partners." Lee Tae-min, trying to be a good diplomat, took a small bite. His face immediately turned green, and he started making choking sounds. Park Bo-ram tried a tiny taste, and immediately spit it out, running for the nearest waste disposal unit. Within minutes, half the human delegation was either vomiting or doubled over with stomach cramps. Han So-young was running around with her medical kit, checking vital signs and handing out emergency medication, while Velandra stood in the middle of the chaos looking completely confused. "What am I doing wrong?" she pleaded to Oh Min-ho, who was one of the few humans still standing upright. "Your species forms connections so easily. There must be a formula, a pattern, a scientific method." Min-ho could see the desperation in her golden eyes. This wasn't just about studying humans anymore. Velandra was desperately trying to figure out how to connect with anyone, and her increasingly frantic attempts were pushing her further away from both species. "Sir Velandra," he said gently, "bonding isn't about copying what others do. It's about genuine care and understanding." But she wasn't listening. She was already planning her next experiment, muttering about optimal physical contact pressure and calculated emotional response timing. Meanwhile, the Viridian authorities had seen enough. Council Speaker Zethmira arrived with several other high-ranking Viridians, all of them radiating disapproval. They spoke in rapid, angry tones to what appeared to be Velandra's family members, other Viridians who shared her distinctive golden eye color, but looked mortified by her behavior. "The young one has become completely unstable," Zethmira declared to Commander Daeho. "She has abandoned all logical thought processes in favor of chaotic emotional experimentation. Our medical specialists recommend immediate cognitive realignment therapy." Daeho didn't need a translator to understand that cognitive realignment therapy probably meant something like brainwashing. The idea of forcibly changing Velandra's personality made him uncomfortable, but he could see why her own people were worried. Velandra was spiraling out of control, and her desperate attempts to understand human connection were only making things worse for everyone involved. Jang Hye-min had gotten lost trying to find the bathroom in the massive Viridian complex when she stumbled across something that made her stop dead in her tracks. Through a partially open doorway, she could see what looked like the world's most obsessive research laboratory. And at the center of it all was Velandra, surrounded by enough charts and graphs to make a university professor jealous. The room was enormous, with crystal walls covered in what appeared to be detailed analysis of human behavior. There were photographs of the human team eating, talking, and interacting, with lines drawn between them like some kind of relationship map. Mathematical equations covered one entire wall, with terms like optimal touch duration and emotional response probability. But the most disturbing part was the collection of strange devices scattered around the room. There were crystal contraptions that looked like they might be scanners, measuring tools of unknown purpose, and what appeared to be some kind of recording equipment that was currently pointed at a screen, showing security footage of the human dining area. Velandra was hunched over a desk, frantically scribbling notes while watching a video of Commander Deho patting Lee Tae-min on the shoulder after a successful translation session. Subject interaction lasted 2.3 seconds, she muttered to herself, hand pressure estimated at 15 pounds per square inch. Facial expression indicates positive emotional state. Must replicate exact pressure and duration for optimal bonding results. Hemin cleared her throat gently, and Velandra spun around so fast she knocked over a stack of charts. "Human Hemin!" she exclaimed, looking embarrassed but also excited. "You have discovered my research facility. Please, you must help me understand the variables I am missing." As Hemin stepped into the room, she realized the scope of Velandra's obsession was far beyond what anyone had imagined. The alien had been treating human friendship like it was a complex scientific formula that could be solved with enough data and analysis. "Velandra, what is all of this?" Hemin asked, looking around at the chaos of charts and measurements. "This is my attempt to understand human bonding protocols," Velandra explained eagerly, pulling out chart after chart. "I have documented 347 different human interaction patterns, measured the frequency and duration of physical contact events, and analyzed facial muscle movement patterns during positive emotional exchanges." She pointed to a particularly complex diagram that looked like it belonged in a physics textbook. This chart shows the correlation between vocal tone frequency and bonding success rates, and this one maps the optimal timing intervals between verbal acknowledgements during conversation. Hemin felt her heart sink as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't just scientific curiosity. This was the desperate work of someone who had no idea how to naturally connect with others, and was trying to solve loneliness through mathematics. "How long have you been working on this?" Hemin asked gently. "Since your arrival 23 days ago," Velandra replied proudly. "I have collected 4,132 individual data points and created 67 different hypotheses about human bonding mechanics. Yet my practical applications continue to fail. There must be variables I have not identified." That's when Hemin noticed something else in the room. Hidden behind all the scientific equipment was a small area that looked like Velandra's personal space, and it was completely empty. No decorations, no personal items, no signs that anyone actually lived there. It was sterile and cold, like a laboratory storage room. "Velandra," Hemin said carefully, "do you have friends among your own people?" The alien's golden eyes dimmed slightly. "Viridians do not engage in the emotional bonding behaviors I observe in humans. We interact through established hierarchy protocols and logical communication patterns. Personal attachment is considered inefficient." Just then, Hemin heard sniffling from the corridor outside. Park Boram was sitting on a crystal bench, looking homesick and tired. Without thinking, Hemin went over and put her arm around Boram's shoulders, offering quiet comfort. Velandra followed and watched this interaction with intense fascination. "Your species, you touch each other without hierarchy protocols," she observed, her voice filled with wonder. "How do you know it's permitted? What signals indicate that physical comfort is acceptable?" "I have not detected any formal communication requesting permission for contact." Hemin looked at Velandra and suddenly understood the real problem. The alien wasn't trying to study humans for scientific curiosity. She was desperately trying to learn how to connect with anyone at all, because her own species had taught her that emotional connections were wrong or unnecessary. We don't ask permission because we can sense when someone needs comfort, Hemin explained gently. It's not about protocols or hierarchy. It's about caring what happens to another person. Velandra stared at her blankly. But how do you know if you care? What triggers this emotional response? Is there a measurement system? Hemin realized that Velandra had been raised in a culture so focused on logic and efficiency that she had never learned the basic emotional skills that humans took for granted. She was trying to reverse engineer friendship because no one had ever taught her that it was something you could simply feel. The research laboratory suddenly looked less like scientific obsession and more like the desperate work of someone who was profoundly, heartbreakingly lonely. The plasma storm hit Viridian Prime without warning. One moment the sky was its usual purple color, with two bright suns, and the next moment everything turned dark orange as massive electrical storms began tearing across the atmosphere. The Viridians immediately went into emergency mode, rushing both diplomatic teams into underground shelter systems that had been built deep into the planet's crystal bedrock. Nam Jiwoo barely had time to grab his emergency pack before a Viridian guide pushed him toward a tunnel entrance. The underground shelters were a maze of small chambers connected by narrow corridors, each one designed to hold exactly 2 people during emergencies. The Viridians had a very organized system for these situations, but in the chaos of the sudden storm, people got separated and mixed up. Jiwoo found himself pushed into a small crystal chamber with smooth walls that glowed with soft blue light. The space was maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with 2 simple sleeping platforms and a small area for supplies. It was clearly designed for Viridians, so everything was a bit too tall for humans, but it felt safe and secure. He was settling in and checking his communications device when the chamber door sealed with a soft hiss. A few seconds later, he heard the unmistakable sound of 6-fingered hands tapping on the door panel, followed by Velandra's voice. "Human Jiwoo? Are you in Chamber 77 Alpha? The storm protocols have sealed us in together." Jiwoo's heart sank a little. He had been hoping for a quiet few hours to read and maybe get some sleep. Being trapped in a small space with Velandra meant he was probably going to be studied, measured, and questioned until the storm passed. "Yeah, I'm here," he called back. "Come on in." But when Velandra entered the chamber, something was different about her. She didn't have any of her usual recording equipment or notebooks. She wasn't carrying her measurement devices or her charts. She just looked tired and a little scared, which was the first time Jiwoo had ever seen her display what seemed like normal emotions. "The storm will last approximately 6 hours," she said quietly, settling onto the other sleeping platform. "The electromagnetic interference will prevent all communications until it passes." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant rumbling of the plasma storm above them. Without her scientific equipment, Velandra seemed lost, like she didn't know how to behave around humans when she wasn't trying to study them. "Do you ever feel disconnected from your own kind?" she asked suddenly, her voice so quiet that Jiwoo almost didn't hear her. The question caught him completely off guard. This wasn't Velandra, the obsessive researcher, asking about human bonding protocols. This was just someone who sounded lonely and confused. Jiwoo thought about the question for a moment. "Yeah, actually, a lot of times." Velandra turned to look at him, her golden eyes reflecting the soft chamber lighting. "Really? But your species seems so naturally social. You touch each other, share food, express emotions freely. How can you feel disconnected?" Jiwoo laughed softly. "Just because we're social doesn't mean it's easy for all of us. I was a really shy kid growing up. While other kids were playing sports or hanging out in groups, I preferred to sit alone and read books. I felt like I was watching everyone else from the outside, trying to figure out how they made it look so easy." "You studied social interactions." "From a distance," Velandra said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like recognition. "Yeah, I guess I did. I used to watch the popular kids at school and try to figure out what made them so confident, what made other people want to be around them. I thought maybe if I could understand the pattern, I could learn to fit in." Velandra was quiet for a long moment. I did not know humans could experience social isolation. Your species appears so naturally connected. Some of us are, Jiwoo said, but some of us have to work at it. Some of us feel like we're speaking a different language even when we're talking to our own kind. Yes, Velandra whispered, exactly like that. For the first time since meeting her, Jiwoo saw Velandra as something other than an alien trying to copy human behavior. She was just someone who felt as awkward and disconnected as he had felt for most of his childhood. What's it like, growing up Viridian? He asked gently. Velandra's skin patterns shifted to darker blues, which Jiwoo was starting to recognize as a sign of sadness or discomfort. We are taught that emotional attachments are inefficient, she said. Logic and hierarchy are the proper ways to interact. I was always different. I wanted to understand why other beings seemed to find joy in connection, but asking such questions was considered inappropriate. So you've been trying to solve friendship like a math problem, Jiwoo said with understanding. Yes, but mathematics cannot explain why your commander Daeho smiled when linguist Boram made an error in translation yesterday. Logic cannot account for why physical specialist Eugene appears genuinely concerned when medical officer So Young expressed fatigue. These behaviors serve no obvious practical purpose, yet they seem to bring your species satisfaction. Jiwoo realized that Velandra had been watching them, not just as a scientist, but as someone desperately trying to understand something her own culture had never taught her was valuable. Connection isn't about purpose, he said. It's just about caring what happens to someone else even when it doesn't benefit you. Velandra considered this for a long time, and for once, she didn't ask for measurements or data. She just sat, quietly, thinking. Bae Sungmin had been watching Velandra for weeks now, first with concern, then with fascination, and finally with something that felt like pride. As the mission's senior cultural observer, it was his job to notice changes in behavior and social dynamics. What he was seeing now was remarkable. The transformation had started after the plasma storm. When everyone emerged from the emergency shelters, Velandra was different. Not dramatically different, but subtly changed in ways that only someone trained to watch social interactions would notice. She still approached the humans with interest, but gone was the frantic note-taking and the awkward attempts to copy their every gesture. When Oh Minho offered her a cup of human coffee the morning after the storm, she didn't pull out measuring devices to analyze the liquid's temperature and chemical composition. She just accepted it with a simple, "Thank you," and took a small, cautious sip. "It's bitter," she said, making a face that was genuinely her own expression of distaste, not a calculated attempt to mimic human facial movements. "Most people add sweetener," Minho suggested with a smile. "I would like to try that," Velandra replied, and Sungmin noticed that her response sounded natural rather than rehearsed. The really impressive change came during everyday conversations. Before the storm, Velandra had treated every human interaction like a scientific experiment. She would ask questions like, "What is the optimal duration for this vocal exchange?" Or, "Should I maintain eye contact for the standard 2.7 seconds during your response?" Now she was just talking. When Park Boram mentioned feeling homesick, Velandra didn't ask for specific measurements of the emotional state or try to calculate the appropriate response. She simply said, "I understand missing familiar places. Is there something from your home that brings you comfort?" It was a perfectly normal question that showed genuine interest rather than scientific curiosity. Boram ended up showing Velandra photos of her family back on Earth, and they spent an hour just talking about their different childhoods. No notes, no measurements, no analysis. Just two beings sharing experiences. Sungmin watched Eugene teaching Velandra how to play a simple, human card game. The alien still asked questions, but they were normal questions like, "What happens if I get two of the same card?" instead of, "What is the mathematical probability of victory based on current hand composition?" When Velandra won a round, she made a sound that could only be described as delighted laughter. It wasn't the carefully observed and replicated happiness, vocalization she had practiced before. It was genuine joy expressed in her own way. The most telling moment came when Lee Tae-min accidentally knocked over a cup of water near some important documents. Without thinking, Velandra immediately moved to help clean up the mess. Her movements were quick and natural, driven by instinct to help rather than calculated social protocol. "Thank you," Taemin said gratefully. "Of course," Velandra replied, as if helping was the most obvious thing in the world. But the real test came when the Viridian Council observed these interactions. Seung-min had been worried about how Velandra's people would react to her continued association with the humans. The council had been growing increasingly concerned about what they called behavioral contamination. However, when council speaker Zethmira watched Velandra interact with the human team, her expression was different than before. Instead of the disapproval and alarm that had marked previous observations, there was something that looked like curiosity. Velandra was no longer frantically copying human behaviors in ways that seemed unstable and concerning. She had developed her own way of being social that honored both her Viridian nature and her growing understanding of connection. She was still logical and thoughtful, but she had learned to include emotional considerations in her thinking. When she disagreed with something, she expressed it clearly but kindly. When someone seemed upset, she offered comfort in ways that felt natural to her. She had stopped trying to be a bad copy of a human and had become a better version of herself. "Interesting," Zethmira murmured to another council member while watching. Velandra helped Commander Daeho understand a complex Viridian cultural concept. She has not abandoned Viridian thinking patterns. She has expanded them. "The human influence has not made her chaotic," the other council member observed. "It has made her more complete." Seung-min could see the wheels turning in the Viridian leadership's minds. What they had initially viewed as dangerous contamination was starting to look like positive adaptation. Velandra had learned something valuable from humans without losing what made her essentially Viridian. The young alien had figured out how to bridge two very different approaches to social connection. She brought Viridian logic and precision to emotional situations, while adding human warmth and spontaneity to her natural analytical nature. Instead of seeing her as a problem to be fixed, the council was beginning to see her as a successful example of interspecies learning. She had proven that understanding others didn't require abandoning yourself. The tension had been building for days. Kang Mi-rae could feel it in every formal meeting, every carefully worded diplomatic exchange, and every worried glance between the Viridian Council members. What had started as a promising first contact mission was turning into a cultural crisis, and it was all because of one young alien who had dared to show interest in human friendship. Council Speaker Zethmira had called for an emergency joint session to address the contamination issue once and for all. The way she said it made it sound like Velandra had caught some kind of dangerous disease from the humans. Mi-rae knew that if this meeting went badly, it could destroy any chance of future cooperation between their species. The meeting hall was enormous, with crystal walls that stretched up toward the ceiling like a cathedral made of blue ice. Representatives from both species sat in carefully arranged groups, with the humans on one side and the Viridians on the other. Velandra sat alone in the middle, looking small and nervous. "The issue before us is clear," Zethmira began, her voice echoing in the vast space. "One of our youth has been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior patterns since exposure to human social customs. This threatens the stability of our established cultural frameworks." Mi-rae had prepared for this moment. As mission commander, it was her responsibility to protect not just her own team, but also to ensure that first contact didn't become a disaster that would haunt both species for generations. "With respect, Council Speaker," Mi-rae said, standing up slowly, "I think we're looking at this situation from the wrong angle." The Viridian Council members exchanged glances. It was unusual for humans to speak so directly during formal proceedings, but Mi-rae had learned that sometimes directness was the only way to cut through complex diplomatic language. "Velandra hasn't been contaminated by human culture," Mi-rae continued. "She's been learning from it, and in the process, she's taught us something important about what connection really means." She gestured toward Velandra, who was sitting with her hands folded, looking more composed than Mi-rae had ever seen her. "When Velandra first started studying our team, she was trying to copy our behaviors exactly. She thought friendship was a formula she could memorize and repeat. But that's not what happened, is it, Velandra? The young Viridian stood up gracefully. No, Commander Mireille. I learned that connection is not about becoming identical to another being. It is about understanding their perspective while maintaining your own authentic nature. Mireille smiled. Exactly. Velandra found a way to bridge our two approaches to relationships. She kept her Viridian logic and precision, but she added human warmth and spontaneity. She didn't abandon who she was. She expanded who she could become. To demonstrate, Mireille called Eugene forward. Eugene has been dealing with some difficult research challenges lately. Velandra, could you show us how you might offer support? Velandra approached Eugene with the calm confidence that had replaced her earlier frantic energy. Instead of grabbing Eugene's arm and staring into her eyes for exactly 37 seconds like she used to do, Velandra simply placed one hand gently on Eugene's shoulder. Your frustration with the crystalline sample analysis is understandable, Velandra said. The molecular structure is more complex than initial scans indicated. Perhaps we could examine it together, using both human intuitive methods and Viridian. Systematic analysis? It was a perfect blend of both approaches. Velandra had acknowledged Eugene's emotional state like a human would, but she had offered practical help in a logical way that honored her own analytical nature. You see, Mireille said to the assembled groups, this isn't contamination, this is evolution. This is two species learning from each other without losing what makes them unique. One of the older Viridian Council members leaned forward. But what are the long-term implications? If our youth begin adopting these emotional approaches, how do we maintain social order? Mireille had expected this question. The same way humans maintain social order while still allowing for individual differences. Velandra hasn't become chaotic or unstable. She's become more capable of working with different types of beings. In a galaxy full of diverse species, isn't that exactly the kind of skill we need? Commander Deho stood up to support his superior. Council Speaker, Velandra has become one of our most effective team members. She helps us understand Viridian perspectives while helping you understand human ones. She's not abandoning Viridian culture, she's expanding it. Park Boram nodded, enthusiastically. She's like a translator, but for emotions and social customs instead of just words. The Viridian Council members began murmuring among themselves in their musical language. Mireille could see that the conversation was shifting from concern about contamination to curiosity about possibilities. Finally, Zethmira spoke again. You suggest that this adaptation could be beneficial for future interspecies relations? I know it could be, Mireille said firmly. Velandra has proven that beings from different worlds can learn from each other without losing themselves. She's built a bridge between our species that neither humans nor Viridians could have built alone. Velandra looked around the room at both groups, and Mireille could see the confidence in her posture. She was no longer the desperate alien, trying to copy human behaviors. She had become something new and valuable, a being who could understand and connect with others while remaining true to her own nature. The bridge had been built, and it was stronger than either species could have imagined. Yu Jae-sung had spent his entire career writing diplomatic protocols. He had created guidelines for trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, and even first contact procedures. But he had never written anything quite like what he was working on now. The first official handbook for human-Viridian social interaction, co-authored by an alien who had accidentally become an expert on both species. This is fascinating, Jae-sung said, looking over the draft they had been working on for 3 days. You've identified interaction patterns that I never would have noticed. Velandra was seated across from him at a specially designed table that accommodated both human and Viridian heights. Her golden eyes were focused on a complex chart that showed the different ways both species expressed agreement, disagreement, and uncertainty. Humans nod their heads vertically to indicate agreement, she said, pointing to one section of the chart. But Viridians tilt their heads slightly to the left. If beings from both species are unaware of these differences, a human might think a Viridian is confused when they are actually agreeing enthusiastically. Jae-sung made notes as she spoke. This was exactly the kind of detailed cross-cultural analysis that could prevent major misunderstandings in future diplomatic meetings. "What about emotional expressions?" he asked. "That seems to be where most of the confusion has happened." Velandra's skin patterns shifted to a lighter blue, which Jae-sung had learned indicated thoughtfulness. This is where the old approach was flawed. Humans had been trying to read Viridian emotions through facial expressions, but we primarily communicate emotional states through skin color changes. Meanwhile, Viridians have been trying to interpret human skin color, not realizing that humans express emotions through facial muscle movements. She pulled out another chart that showed side-by-side comparisons of emotional expressions. A human smile indicates happiness or friendliness. But when I first tried to replicate this expression, it appeared threatening to other Viridians because facial muscle contractions are associated with aggression in our species. So instead of copying each other's expressions, we need to learn to recognize each other's natural signals, Jae-sung said, finally understanding the breakthrough that Velandra had achieved. Exactly. When I stopped trying to smile like a human, and instead used the Viridian equivalent, lighter skin tones and relaxed posture, humans could still recognize that I was expressing positive emotions, even though I was doing it in my own way. They worked together for hours, documenting the principles that would allow future interactions to be more natural and authentic. Instead of rigid rules about copying behaviors, they created guidelines based on understanding and respect. The breakthrough came when they tested their new protocols with volunteers from both species. Instead of the awkward, stilted interactions that had characterized early meetings, the exchanges flowed naturally. Humans learned to watch for Viridian skin color changes, while Viridians learned to pay attention to human facial expressions. Both groups could be themselves while still communicating effectively. News of their success spread quickly through both diplomatic communities. Council Speaker Zethmira herself reviewed their work and gave official approval for Velandra to become the first certified human Viridian cultural liaison. "You have created something entirely new," Zethmira told Velandra during the certification ceremony. "You are neither human nor traditionally Viridian, but something that incorporates the strengths of both approaches to social connection." The impact went far beyond just diplomatic protocols. Other young Viridians began approaching Velandra with questions about emotional expression and social connection. For the first time in Viridian history, there was someone who could teach them that feelings and relationships didn't have to be suppressed or ignored. Chimera, a young Viridian scientist, was one of the first to seek Velandra's guidance. "I have been curious about the human concept of friendship," she admitted quietly, "but I do not wish to abandon Viridian logic and precision." "You do not have to abandon anything," Velandra assured her. "I still think analytically about problems. I still prefer organized approaches to complex situations, but I have learned that emotions can provide valuable data that pure logic sometimes misses." Soon, there was a small group of young Viridians who were learning to balance their natural, analytical nature with a more open approach to social connection. They weren't copying human behaviors, but they were exploring emotional experiences that their culture had previously discouraged. The success of the cultural exchange program led to formal requests from other alien species who wanted similar liaison training. Velandra found herself at the center of a new field of interspecies social diplomacy. 6 months ago, I was desperately trying to measure the exact pressure of a human handshake, Velandra told Jae-sung as they prepared for their next assignment. "Now I am teaching beings from 4 different worlds how to understand each other while remaining true to themselves." "You've started something revolutionary," Jae-sung replied. "You've proven that connection doesn't require conformity. The protocols they had developed were being adapted for use with multiple species, and Velandra had become the galaxy's first expert in authentic interspecies social interaction. She had turned her early failures into a blueprint for successful cross-cultural understanding. The transport ship Unity Bridge dropped out of hyperspace near the Altarian system, and Seo Hyunjae felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came with first contact missions. As the new mission commander, he had big shoes to fill after the success of the Viridian diplomatic breakthrough, but he wasn't facing this challenge alone. Preliminary scans show 3 distinct species on the planet's surface, reported the ship's science officer. Initial communications suggest they've been trying to establish trade relationships, but something isn't working. Velandra stood beside Hyunjai at the bridge viewport, looking calm and confident in her new role as chief cultural liaison. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate alien trying to copy human behaviors. Now she wore a specially designed uniform that combined human diplomatic styling with Viridian cultural elements, and she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had become an expert in her field. "What do we know about their communication problems?" Velandra asked, her voice steady and professional. "Each species speaks the same trade language, but their negotiations keep breaking down," Hyunjai explained. "They want to cooperate, but somehow they keep offending each other without meaning to." Velandra's skin patterns shifted to the lighter blue that indicated thoughtful analysis. Likely a case of cross-cultural misunderstanding. They are probably interpreting each other's behaviors through their own cultural frameworks instead of learning each other's actual communication styles. When they landed on Altair Prime, the scope of the problem became immediately clear. Representatives from 3 different species, the tall, insectoid Zixkari, the short, furry Balans, and the crystalline Therids, were trying to conduct trade negotiations in the same room, but everything about their body language suggested frustration and confusion. The Zixkari delegate was clicking his mandibles rapidly, which seemed to be annoying the Balan representative, whose fur was standing on end in obvious agitation. Meanwhile, the Therid was flashing different colors in what appeared to be an attempt at communication, but the other 2 species were completely ignoring the light display. 6 months of attempted negotiations, the station administrator, a human named Roberts, explained wearily. They all want the same thing, a 3-way trade agreement that would benefit everyone. But every meeting ends in arguments that none of them seem to understand. Hyunjai looked at Velandra. "What do you think?" Instead of pulling out measurement devices or asking for detailed behavioral analysis like she might have done in the past, Velandra simply walked over to the 3 frustrated delegates. "Hello," she said in her clear musical voice. "I am Velandra, and I specialize in helping different species understand each other. May I observe your communication for a moment?" The Zixkari delegate, whose name was Trixivor, immediately began clicking again. "These negotiations are impossible. The Balans show aggression at every proposal, and the Therids refuse to participate in proper discussion." Balan delegate Furry Stripes, which seemed to be a literal translation of her name, bristled visibly. "We show no aggression, we simply express normal enthusiasm, and the Zixkari make threatening sounds constantly." The Therid, whose name was Crystal Song, flashed a series of red and blue lights. Both species ignore traditional greeting protocols and proceed directly to business discussions without proper acknowledgement. Velandra listened to all 3 complaints and immediately recognized the pattern. These species were doing exactly what she had done months ago, interpreting unfamiliar behaviors through their own cultural expectations. "Trixfor," she said gently, "when you click your mandibles, what does that communicate in Zixkari culture?" "It indicates thoughtful consideration," he replied, confused by the question. "And Furry Stripes, when your fur stands up, what does that mean to Balans?" "Excitement and engagement with interesting ideas," she answered. "Crystal Song, your light. Displays serve what purpose?" "Traditional greeting and acknowledgement of all participants in a discussion." Velandra nodded knowingly. "So Trixivor has been expressing thoughtful consideration, which Furry Stripes has been interpreting as threatening sounds. Furry Stripes has been showing excitement and engagement, which Trixivor has been reading as aggression, and Crystal Song has been trying to properly greet everyone, which both other species have been ignoring because they don't realize it's a greeting." The 3 delegates stared at her, then at each other, as understanding dawned. "You mean," Furry Stripes said slowly, "when Trixivor clicks, he's actually thinking carefully about our proposals. And when your fur stands up, you're not preparing to attack?" Trixivor asked in amazement. Crystal Song flashed a gentle blue pattern. "This is why proper greeting acknowledgements are important. They establish communication frameworks. Within an hour, Velandra had helped all three species understand each other's natural communication styles. Instead of trying to change their behaviors, she taught them to recognize what each other's signals actually meant. The trade negotiations that had been stalled for 6 months were completed successfully in 2 days. "How did you know how to do that?" Hyunjai asked Velandra as they prepared to leave Altair Prime. "Because I made all the same mistakes," she replied with a gentle laugh. "I spent weeks trying to copy human behaviors instead of understanding human intentions. Once I learned that connection is about caring what someone else is experiencing, not copying what they do, everything became much simpler." The success of the Altarian mission led to requests from dozens of other worlds. The Human Viridian Cultural Exchange Program became the gold standard for interspecies diplomacy, with Velandra training a new generation of cultural liaisons from multiple species. Years later, when asked about the secret to successful interspecies relations, Velandra would always give the same answer. "Stop trying to become someone else. Start trying to understand someone else. The universe is big, enough for all of us to be ourselves."